The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to this online education opportunity offered by STN. I just want to make a few announcements before we get started and let our attendees know online that your lines are muted, so we will not be able to hear any questions. However, if you have questions, you should have a question box on your control panel. If we have time at the end, we'll take questions, but feel free to type those questions in at any time. If we don't have time to get to those today, we'll do our best to try to email the questions and answers out to the participants after the event. Just want to remind everyone that this is being recorded for online viewing later. And in order to claim your CNE for this event, you will need to respond to an email that you'll receive after the event and complete the evaluation form. And then you should receive your certificate in about 5 to 10 business days. Tonight, our speaker is going to be Dr. Rob Levine. I'm sorry, not Rob Levine. Dr. Brian Levine, Drew University in Madison, New Jersey. He completed his medical training at the University of Vermont College of Medicine in Burlington, Vermont. Completed his residency in emergency medicine at the former Medical Center of Delaware, now Christiana Care Health Center in Wilmington, Delaware. He served as chief resident during his final year. Dr. Levine joined Christiana Care Health System's Department of Emergency Medicine in 1998, where he is now the program director of the Emergency Medicine Residency. He is board certified and holds current medical licensures in Delaware and Maryland. Dr. Levine is the Associate Medical Director of Christiana Care's LifeNet Aeromedical Transport Program. Currently, he's an Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Dr. Levine, I'll let you get started when you're ready.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and we have a bunch of slides to go over, so we'll get started right away. First, there is some housekeeping stuff. If you look at the first or next slide here, let's see if it goes. So there are many objectives that are important to cover before we start. We want to describe the epidemiology of street drugs in America, recognize a patient who's under the influence of illicit drugs, and then evaluate the physiologic effects of cocaine, opiates, and bath salts on the body. There is a disclosure that you should know that myself, Brian Levine, does not disclose any conflict of interest relative to this educational activity. I've not paid for any illicit drugs or used any in the past 25 or 50 years. The CE statement says the Society of Trauma Nurses is accredited as a provider of continuing nursing education by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. This event has been awarded 1 contact hour. The enduring materials for the on-demand webinar will expire on November 30th of next year, 2015. To successfully complete this course, participants must attend the entire event and complete and/or submit the evaluation at the end of the session. Students viewing the on-demand lesson must also complete a post-test evaluation and pass with a minimum of 75%. So let's get started. Now, I am actually very Delaware-centric. I am from New York. You can't tell because I lost the accent a couple of years ago when I moved here. But Delaware in general is interesting to look at because it's a small state of a little over 100 miles long and about 1 million people. But it does have its fair share of issues when you look at it. And it's number 7 in the country for assaults, number 10 for murders, number 3 for robberies. If you look at our state prison population, it's almost 7,000, and a probation population of 20,000. So, you know, our national crime ranking amongst the U.S. is 6th. So pretty bad, actually, when you think about it. When we look at the drug seizures from a couple of years ago, the cocaine's about 26 kilos, which is really not a lot. And heroin is 0, methamphetamine is 0, and marijuana is only a couple of kilos. And the reason why the numbers are so low, even though we do have such a very high drug problem, is because we don't really have the resources or the law enforcement. If you compare those numbers to like New York City, we have 100th of what they say have federal drug seizures, but they have a much more robust system to evaluate and attack this problem. When you look at the heroin bust per 100,000 people, the top 20, congratulations, Delaware, 3.56, and then where I did my medical training at the University of Vermont. Do you think it's ironic that those are the top two that follow me around? They're obviously two small states, and the reason is because you get, a state with 1 million people or less, and the numbers are much more magnified when you have a couple of people in the million. Really, if you do the math, there's just not a lot of people there. So when you get a couple of bucks, it makes it look like the numbers are much worse than they really are. So it's interesting that we rank #1 for heroin seizures per capita at 3.56, and this is really mostly in the northern part of the state where most of the volume is, and there's a connection there between New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and D.C., and it's sort of like a drug run, they call it. And the purity of heroin has actually increased. We'll talk about that when we go over the opiates. But what are the real consequences of drug use? And we all know this, and we see this every day when we work in the emergency department. It affects the community. It affects the economy, and I'll show you some financial numbers in a minute. Obviously, the health issues, that's what we deal with on a daily basis in the emergency department. A lot of violence, and we see a fair amount of that as well, along with crime, and it affects families. And some of us have our own personal stories to tell of these. So we look at the numbers that the United States users spend on $63 billion a year. So that's a lot on illicit drugs. So imagine taking $63 billion and putting it into something else, like education. That is, the GNP, this would be probably bigger than a lot of third world countries. So $37 billion. This is back in 2000, so it's old data. And that's a lot of money spent just on cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. So the healthcare components we know are vast, from community-based treatment, there's federally provided treatment centers, there's also support for drug abuse-related services, and then what we see are the medical-related issues such as hospital and ambulatory care, special disease costs like HIV, hepatitis, et cetera, crime victim, and then health administration costs. When you look at the number of episodes of emergency use and emergency department episodes from about 10 years ago as well, we're talking 600,000 per year. And heroin and cocaine are the top two by far. Marijuana a little bit, which we'll get to, but there's also others that we'll mention. But the big ones that we see for the emergency department and in trauma systems are really heroin and cocaine. So that's why we're going to spend a fair amount of time on that in a couple of minutes. So when we look at, obviously, the ED visits back in 2006, it's the rate per 100,000 population is cocaine's 180, and from there it's marijuana and heroin and then stimulants. So when you look at young adults, the ones that get the most utility out of these medications and drugs and are the biggest abusers, 18 to 25, when you look at it over the past 10 to 15 years, the users are usually range between 15 and 25%. So it's a fair number of 1 in 5 to 1 in 7. And I stole this run and I love it and I've had it for 10 years. But it really depends on the age about who's reporting use of drugs in the past month. And there's a couple of scary things that you look at on like a slide like this. So 12 to 13 years old, 3%. That's pretty scary. 12 to 13-year-olds saying they're using illicit drugs. Then you get to the big numbers, mostly your late high school, 18 to 20, late teens. Then there's this bump up in the 40 to 50 range. And it's interesting, there's still people that were fairly big drug users back in the 1970s that still use. And those are sort of your Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix type styles that were doing the LSD, et cetera, way back at Woodstock that are still continuing to do it. I will tell you, not a month goes by where when I work at one of our other hospitals, I don't see somebody over the age of 60 who's doing an illicit drug. So you would think that people would stop generally in their 40s or 50s, but I've seen people up in their 60s and 70s using things like PCP and heroin and cocaine. It's pretty remarkable. When you look at the percentage of those who've used any illicit drug in a lifetime, and depending on what age you are, even 8th graders, you can look at the 20 to 40% range. But once you get to 12th grade, at least half of all kids have tried illicit drugs. And I know this is a phone webinar, but I usually say to my audience, just raise your hand if you've ever done any illicit drugs. I'm just kidding. No one had raised their hand. Although I did the lecture once, and somebody in the background was not really paying attention, lifted his hand up, and then realized, oh my God, I'm full of that. I thought that was kind of funny. So, the big deal with this stuff, and we're going to get to the individual drugs themselves in a couple of minutes, but there's an important need for screening. This really is about trauma, too. So we know injuries related to substance abuse. We see it every day. Most hospitals actually don't routinely screen on everyone that comes in with an injury. It's part of our protocol here, and most of the trauma centers that we see, especially the other ones who have a protocol-based care system, most of them will do blood alcohol and drugs. We do it for most, and it's variable when you look at it, especially around the country. So it's interesting when you look at what the American Trauma Society says, that the patients with diseases have the right and to expect hospitals to seek the underlying cause of their illnesses, and hospitals and physicians are responsible for doing so. So it sort of justifies our use for screening all these patients. Because if you notice that Joe Blow comes in with moderate trauma and he's positive for cocaine, you can actually try and at least get them some sort of resources or help for that cocaine problem, which can hopefully curb the use in the future. The facts, when we look at them from the 90s, is 2,500 patients, just from an NIH study, 2,500 trauma patients followed for over a year after their injuries. Patients who are intoxicated at the time of the initial injury were more than 2 times likely than other patients to sustain a second injury. We've all seen those before, and then those were found to have chronic alcohol and drug use were 3.5 times more likely to get a second injury. We've all seen people that were shot more than once, and that's very common. Once you've been shot once, your risk of getting shot a second time is elevated. So that's some epidemiology and background, and now this is a little bit more of the fun medical stuff where it can get actually more exciting and pseudo-interactive. So when you look at these patients, the initial evaluation is really what I look at these things like you're a detective. It's really a lot of fun because a lot of times you don't know what these patients have taken. And they come in altered or injured, and you have no idea what their background is. So you have to use your eyes and ears to look at the vital signs and try and gather any information you can from such sources as family, police, paramedics, friends, etc. So the history is critical, and you try to get that if you can. But a lot of times we get none, and there's drop-offs, and people drive away, and you have to sort through these things independently, and that's kind of fun too. Sometimes you can actually have the paramedics or send somebody to the house because you can find things like broken, furniture, suicide notes, pill bottles, alcohol bottles, things like that can really give you a clue as to what the patient possibly ingested or that they have some issue at home. So there's a couple of things you should know about when you look at on physical exam. There's something called Toxidromes, which are like a constellation of symptoms based on a basic sort of pharmacologic substance that they've taken or class. So the first is sympathomimetic, and those are things like cocaine and PCP. When you see those kind of patients, you think of such vital signs as hypertension and tachycardia, diaphoresis. Sometimes they can present as seizures as well. And it's important to just remember diaphoresis for it, and we'll get back to that, what that means. So that's sympathomimetic. Then the opposite of what I really is of sympathomimetic is anticholinergic. Anticholinergics are things like Jimson weed. We had a rash of Jimson weed in the mid-2000s here in Delaware where kids would eat them and or smoke it, and they would come in acting really goofy. Fertilizers as well can have anticholinergics, and just simple side effects of things like Benadryl or antihistamines. They have a lot of anticholinergic properties as well. So what I see in general in those people are dry mouth, dilated pupils, flushing, tachycardia, just like sympathomimetic, and then they classically, I don't know if you've seen this before, but if you saw this in that big Jimson weed overdose, I've seen actually a big Benadryl overdose where people would do hand grasping. You ever watch them do this? They sort of, their hands are going out in front, they're sort of picking at things in the air. That's classically seen in anticholinergic toxicity. The big difference between anticholinergic and sympathomimetic, they both really cause hypertension, tachycardia, and the dilated pupils, but it's the diaphoresis that you see in sympathomimetic, and you see dry skin in anticholinergic. That's the real difference, and we'll get to that when we get down a little bit. But you can tell the difference, and we'll talk about how we dealt with these patients in the ED. The third category is opiates. We've all seen these before. So people that do anything related to morphine or affects the mu receptor. So you'll hear the mu receptor is called the M or mu receptor because it has some morphine receptor, but that's all opiate classes like heroin, dilaudid, hydrocodone, hydromorphone, morphine, fentanyl. All those cousins do the same kind of thing. So when you look at it, opiates cause pinpoint pupils. You can get hypotension, and the number one thing that kills people that do opiates is respiratory depression. We see that a fair amount. That's really what will kill them. Sedative hypnotics is the fourth category. If you see somebody that's altered mental status but has normal vital signs, it's sedative hypnotics are proven otherwise. It doesn't mean it's not a stroke or a head bleed or something else like hypoglycemia, etc. But classically, it's normal vital signs, and they're unresponsive. You look up somebody to the monitor, and their vitals look stone cold normal, and you can't even wake them up. That's classic. When you get any drunk guy, or in the street or in their house, you put them up to a monitor, that's exactly what happened. Their vitals will be normal. It doesn't mean you shouldn't look for head trauma, or head bleed, or intra-abdominal trauma, or intra-abdominal bleeding, or retroperitoneal bleeding, or whatever. But just think that the majority of the time when people are intoxicated and have normal vital signs, sedative hypnotics. What are the big sedative hypnotics? Alcohol, number one, but benzos, barbiturates, those are the second classes also. So for us, we see a fair amount of those, but we will use vital signs to detect whether, in general, that if there's something else on board. Because sympathomimetic and anticholinergic have hypertension and tachycardia. So what do you do immediately when we see these patients? We all know there's trauma regimens and mental status regimens that people do, but, ABCs are critical. They're called vital signs because they're vital. And, when in doubt, the old days used to be intubate everybody that comes in altered and looks like a mess and can't protect their airway. You don't hear that much anymore, do you? Because we know that bowel trauma and intubating people willy-nilly. We used to do things when I was a resident way back in the 90s for MRB, if you ever heard of that, maximal resident benefit. So we would tube people as much as possible just to get the procedure. But we now know that bowel trauma can lead to ventilator-associated pneumonia and pneumothorax and a variety of other issues. So we don't really intubate at will. We pretty much only do it when people have real difficulties with things like aspiration or hypoxia or tachypnea, et cetera. So that's really the time we'll do that. Gastric lavage is interesting. If you look at the toxicologic literature, and it really comes in waves and usually patterns of 10 to 20 years at a clip, we are now in the wave of do not do gastric lavage. The data is really interesting, even on charcoal. I very rarely use charcoal anymore, unless you want to teach somebody a lesson by giving that stuff to them to drink. But gastric lavage, by shoving a big E-wall tube down somebody's throat to their stomach to try and suck out any gastric contents, when most of the stuff is gone within an hour or so, you think about it, 50% of the GI contents are gone out of the stomach within an hour. It's hard to sort of justify putting a big tube that increases risk for perforation and or aspiration. So in general, most of these patients have to be intubated anyway. When was the last time we've seen E-wall tubes used in the ED? Very uncommonly, maybe once or twice a year. So the only time I would consider it if someone took something that could potentially kill them in small doses or long-acting. So if someone saw somebody take a handful of beta blockers right in front of them and you got right to them, then it may consider it. But how often do you see that? So it's very rare that you would consider it. In general, it's not even recommended anymore. Don't forget the fifth vital sign also of temperature. Hypothermia and hyperthermia both have bad negative consequences, obviously. Hypothermia can signify that they're out in the cold, or they can be septic or hypoglycemic, where the body just sort of shuts down. Hyperthermia, think of meds also, or drugs. So the big one for hyperthermia is sympathomimetics also. So cocaine, PCP, anything that gets people really fired up in general can cause hyperthermia as well. What happens with a lot of these guys when they have cocaine on board and they're all hypothermic and they're fighting with the police and they're running from you and it's a battle for an hour? Then you start worrying about rhabdo, dehydration, renal failure, badness down the line as well. So you got to keep that. Don't forget to check their complete vital sign when you see them. So that's sort of a good little background case for the 5 minutes there. Now we're going to take a good solid 30 minutes, and for a couple of minutes each, we're going to take each of the big classes or types of drugs which create problems in the trauma and the emergency world that you're guaranteed to see in your next shift. I will buy you a beverage if that's not true. So anyway, what I have on these slides, we have the slide down on the slide here. First, we're going to talk about cocaine. And I put it next to it in parentheses, or at least in quotations, the street names of these things. There are literally 50 to hundreds of street names for all these drugs. And it's really, if these people that are really into naming these drugs put their minds and their cool sort of advertising brain to something else, they can do wonderful things. It's amazing. Think about the money, $60 billion a year that's spent on this, plus the wasted brain that's people are such big users on. But in general, you can do a lot of good, but that's for another time. So, cocaine. In 2000, 3.7 million users in the United States. So we have to say, look to your left and look to your right. I bet one of you at least done it once. Raise your hand if you've done cocaine. See, I told you 3 people raised their hand. So 25 million people in the United States have tried it at least once. It can be snorted, smoked, injected, or squirted into the nose. So what do those things all have in common? They're really mucosal linings, so they're easily absorbed from there. So it's a sodium channel blocker, and it's also an ester local anesthetic. If you ever hear people asking for 4 to 10% of cocaine in the liquid form, DED, we have it here. We can actually put it on a cotton swab or a cotton ball and touch it in the mucosal surface, and it causes a lot of vasoconstriction. So we use it here for nosebleeds. I think it's way better than epinephrine. It's a really powerful vasoconstrictor. It doesn't get a lot of systemic absorption. You use it on a cotton swab. But when you, in the real world, obviously they're using a lot higher percentage than 4 to 10%. So what are the side effects? It's a sympathomimetic, or what are the natural effects? Really, with mydriasis, so you get big pupils, you get tachycardia, you get hypertension, you get diaphoresis. That's the main way you tell the difference between sympathomimetics and anticholinergics. Is sympathomimetics get you sweaty. So when people come in with big pupils or acting a little freaky and they're hypertensive and tachycardic, when I did my toxicology rotation at Bellevue, they would put on a glove and they would take their hand and put it right in their armpit. And then they take their hand out and they look at it. If there was sweat on it, they think it was sympathomimetics. If it was dry, it was anticholinergics. Really interesting, good way to tell the difference, because if you look at it otherwise, the same thing happens when you do anticholinergics. The Jimson weeders do the same thing. They get mydriasis, tachycardia, and hypertension, but they don't get sweaty. So it's a way to tell the difference between the two. In 1980s, people did a lot of cocaine. Remember Tony Montaigne and some of those great movies that were out there. Recreational use we saw. And then in the 1990s, we saw regular use with dependence. The biggest group, obviously, for most drugs is 18 to 24. Those are your biggest risk takers, 18 to 24-year-old males. And it does affect all socioeconomic groups. And back in the 90s, in general, it was the upper layer of society were doing powder, and the lower were doing crack. But you know what? Those lines are totally blurred. It doesn't matter where your socioeconomic status is. You'll do either form, and you see it regardless of what your income is. When you look at the pharmacokinetics, it really depends on the route that you take it. So when you inject it, cocaine comes in very quickly. It peaks in a couple of minutes, and it's gone usually 20 or 30 minutes. The other way you can take it is snorting it or insufflating it. That comes on usually within a couple of minutes, and it's gone within an hour in general. And then GI. Does anybody have any idea what GI cocaine is? Where does that come in? Right. So some people store drugs in their orifices to escape detection. So we see it in such things as you getting chased by the police and you shove a little packet in your rectum, or you're getting chased by the police and you swallow it to avoid detection. So there's packers and there's stuffers, and we can talk about the difference between the two of them. We will say over the past 10 years, I would say there were a handful of dead animals and cute little puppies and snakes that have occurred from overseas, because people would actually cut holes in these animals and store drugs in them and then send them over as exotic pets to America, and then they find either the animal's dead or they run the animal through an x-ray machine and they say that they stuffed their bellies all with cocaine. And then it's really sad what they did, and they noticed it. Usually where they figure this out is when the animals come over dead because the packaging burst or something. But that's one technique to use for, illegally trying to get these substances into the country. So like we said, it's a sodium channel blocker, so it is a local anesthetic, of course. And then it does affect the uptake of norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. So you know what those are? Those are sort of the excitation factors. So you get an increase in the sympathetic nervous system. And that's the side, and the effects that you'll see sometimes things called intracranial hypertension. I love that. That's really talkative, active, sociable people, and occasionally get agitated. We'll see people on cocaine that want to fight everybody or get all fired up. Hyperthermia occurs for several reasons. It stimulates the thermal regulatory center. It increases psychomotor agitation, and it does cause vasoconstriction. And new onset seizures in somebody who's 20 to 40 years old, something I always think of. I'll never forget. I saw a woman who was probably 30 years old in the hallway, and a very regular-looking woman with her husband and 2 kids, new onset seizure. They were all upset, and then her husband and child, the kids, walk away, and I nonchalantly just sort of told her, that's why I was doing the history of, when was the last time you did any cocaine? And you know what she did? She just looked at me and cried and said, how did you know? It's amazing. That's one technique I always use, and I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but a technique I use to try to get people to endear to me and tell me things, is be nonchalant and non-judgmental and non-threatening. I just said, when was the last time you did cocaine? And she just sort of like, how did you know? So it really kind of weird. If I would have said things like I see a lot of our residents saying, you don't do cocaine, do you? That negative inflection with that type of voice and a negative style question makes you not want to answer yes ever because you're not going to get any help from them. At least I did it in a fashion where I was like, no big deal, just when was the last time you did it? And this was a nuance in cocaine. So nuance in seizures. So when you see nuance in seizures, something to think about is cocaine, to be totally honest with you. So I get a drug use screen on all my nuance in seizures. Migraines also, because it has to do probably with vasoconstrictive and vasodilation with the vessels. Acute blindness in young people. People say they can't see out of one eye. They think it's probably mostly from thrombi that occur or vasoconstriction of the ophthalmic artery. So it's kind of weird. But the big thing that we worry about when people do cocaine is chest pain. And that's really difficult because we know when people do cocaine in general, it's going to affect your heart. And the way it affects your heart is, one, it causes sympathetic overdrive, so you get tachycardia and hypertension. But it also causes vasoconstriction. It also increases platelet aggregation. It does a variety of things where thrombus formation can be increased. So your risk of heart attack is higher when you do cocaine. But the problem is, who gets cocaine chest pain? Or who does cocaine? Who's the most highest risk group? 18 to 24-year-old males. What kind of hearts 18 to 24-year-old males have? Normal, healthy, big vessels, all good. So most of these guys, in general, won't have any real mortality. Doing all the studies of people that get cocaine chest pain actually rule in for MIs, in general, they have no major issues if they're young and healthy. I'll never forget, I did see an MI in like a 45-year-old guy, a dentist who I saw many years ago, who was at his high school reunion, whatever, 25 years, said he would just try cocaine once to see what it felt like. Comes in with a huge anterior accelerated MI. Could have died, unbelievable, and this is just trying cocaine once. But that's different than Joe 18 with a nice, young, healthy heart with probably no constriction or underlying disease itself. So it's interesting. In general, the rule is if you say you had cocaine chest pain, if you did cocaine and you have chest pain and you did it greater than 12 hours ago, in general, most of the time that most people will just check usually a troponin, sort of check markers, and if you don't have any elevation and they look pretty good, most of the time they'll just either opt them or discharge them. Because we know that the MI rate is low, the dysrhythmia rate is low, especially at the 12 hours. So it depends, but the problem that we have with these people is they come in and they did cocaine a couple hours ago and they now have chest discomfort. What do you do with them? The risk of an MI is still low, but it's not zero. It's definitely way higher than the population. So most of the time we opt those people or we'll stress them or cast them. So in general, it's a tough group because you don't know what to do with them, but the bulk of the time it's not associated with any long-term issues. Thank God, because they usually have underlying good protocol. There are pulmonary complications to consider, like asthma exacerbation, especially nuance to asthma in a young person, pneumothorax, pneumomediastinum, and then non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema when you come in heart failure but have normal heart size. And that usually because, excessive cocaine use eventually, if the heart is persistently hypertensive or tachycardic, it just sort of, the efficiency of the pump wanes, and then you'll get some flow back into the lungs. Thermal angio, I've seen people do that with crack where they light it up on a spoon and they put a really hot flame right by the back of that throat. And if you take your tongue and feel the back, that soft palate there, you put really hot material there, it just dissolves like tissue paper. I look in people's mouths and see that all hurt away. I've also seen people that do chronic cocaine and put it in the nose, and look at it, it's a big vasoconstrictor. So eventually the blood supply stops and they lose their septum in the nose as well. So that's another feature that we'll see. Pregnancy is obviously bad, and then nausea you'll see occasionally as well. The treatment in general for cocaine is to really calm down the sympathomimetic response. And the number one way we do that, deal with that is benzos. And for us, our favorite benzos are Ativan or Valium. Nice, long-acting, slow on, slow off, gentle benzos. Shut the lights off and just give them the benzos. Sometimes if they're worried about big seizures, you can use barbiturates. If they're hyperthermic, you treat that as well. If they're rhabdo, IV fluids, etc. In general, you don't want to use beta blockers. What do we use a beta blocker with a cocaine person anyway? So if someone comes in with chest pain, it looks like they're ruling in. A lot of times you just want to give a beta blocker. The AHA says do so within 24 hours. Technically, this is such a strong beta agonist, but it's also an alpha agonist as well. If you give somebody with cocaine a beta blocker, you block all the beta, you can technically have excessive alpha. You just unopposed alpha, and that can lead to real bad hypertension and tachycardia. and talk about it. I've inadvertently given beta rock to people who've been on cocaine by accident in the past. In my 15-year career, I've never seen a problem, but in general, it's theoretical, and you can potentially create some issues. So something to think about. In general, most of the time, they come in with cocaine, chest pain. What do I think about? Benzos, aspirin I'll give, and then start thinking about they're going to go up to cath lab, et cetera. So that's cocaine. Next is heroin, also known as smack. And heroin's purity really can range between, obviously, 1 and 98%. The average in this country is around 35%. And we've seen more heroin use, and I don't know about your places where I'm talking to, you guys on the webcam. In general, in our area, we've seen an increase in snorting and smoking as the purity has risen. In this area, it's right around 60%, and you see an increase in effect due to there's a lot of people that are now using fentanyl in combination with just regular heroin, and fentanyl has some high concentration. We actually had a couple of deaths here. Was it last year with the fentanyl combination? We've seen some in Philly as well, in New York. So people are getting crazy, and fentanyl is very pure and has pharmacokinetics that come on really high. And when you get fentanyl in combination with heroin, obviously excessive opiates on such a high level will cause you to just stop breathing, and that's what kills you in general. Respiratory depression is what it is for opiates. We've seen more teenagers use it, and you can do just like cocaine. You can inject it, you can snort it, you can smoke it, and it does cause that mu receptor activation. That's peaks usually in a couple of minutes. The deaths, like we said, are mostly from IV use in general, because it comes on really quick and hard, and it's respiratory depression. And what do you get when you do heroin? You get these effects such as euphoria, analgesia, clouding, small pupils, and the rushes you get right from the drug, and the reward is dependent. So a lot of people talk about taking heroin, they want it more and more and more. We see it a lot. That's why, and no matter what you think of methadone, it's really tries to pull away this rush reward. It's a slow on, slow off, boring kind of opiate that hopefully avoids people from wanting to go out and take more and lets it get out of their system. And there's positives and negatives to methadone, but that's sort of the way it works. The complications with chronic use of heroin, in general, you got to worry about the heart, especially if you're injecting, it can affect both valves. Non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema, that's where I'll see that. More than cocaine, I'll see it actually much more in heroin. And actually there's an association even probably more with not with the opiate, but the mu receptor antagonism. When you get people on Narcan, I've seen people going to heart failure. It's fascinating why that happens. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then we know one of the big side effects of opiate use is constipation. And there's, the more you take it, the more constipated you get. And that used to think, people will be pretty good about stopping it because they hate that side effect. But it's just a chronic side effect that these people will have. The treatment, when you have issues where you have respiratory depression and you're in fear of intubating someone, then you can consider Narcan. So the only time I will use a mu receptor antagonist or a reversal agent for opiate is if I'm really worried about them not breathing at all. If they're breathing, I don't use Narcan in general. As long as they're maintaining some airway, the more Narcan you give, the more risk you're going to put them in withdrawal. So you're seeing doses, especially if you deal with people from New York Tox or New York Poison Control Center, which is sort of like the backbone of a lot of the protocols that are out there. They're using tiny TB syringe doses, weight-based milliliter doses of Narcan, just to get people breathing a little bit. Because once you cross that threshold, remember years ago we used to get 1 or 2 milligrams at a time, everyone get half a milligram, they'd wake up, and what happens, especially if you guys are EMTs or paramedics, they wake up and go ballistic and start puking and going crazy on you. And we've seen fights in the back of ambulances. There were actually some deaths. I think people got thrown out of ambulances. So if you think about it, if you did heroin really bad and you're intubated, and then you got, Narcan, you wake right up and you go from a state of absolute euphoria, life is good, you're laying on the beach in Jamaica, nothing can affect your world, to all of a sudden you have the worst flu in your life. So withdrawal is considered like the flu times 10 is what most people call it. We'll talk about withdrawal in a second. But once you go into that system, people just go ballistic, and it's really pretty scary. The problem with Narcan is it doesn't last that long, whereas pure heroin lasts sometimes hours. The more pure it is, the longer it lasts. So Narcan in general is really starting to go away in 20 to 30 minutes, or naloxone, sorry, these are the brand name, where some heroin can last hours. So let's say Joe Blow is stopped breathing, and you give him a little bit of naloxone, he starts waking up, but he's breathing okay. And then what happens 20 minutes later, the stuff wears off, but the heroin's going to go on for hours, they just stop breathing again. My most favorite or famous case that I had when I was working at the city hospital, and the EMS gets called and the police to someone who is found dead on the floor because they did heroin. They wake him up with Narcan, and he's pretty arousable and can actually stand and walk to the ambulance. He walks with his mom to the ambulance, and then he pushes everybody aside, runs back in the house, and locks the door. And then so the police and ambulance call and say, well, the guy's awake now, can we leave? And we said, nope, you got to break down the door because he's going to die in 20 minutes or stop breathing. When this stuff wears off and he still has some heavy-duty heroin on board, lo and behold, they break down his door, he's on the floor, barely breathing again, they wake him up, and he lives to do it again. So you got to be careful by knowing the duration of action. And then there's some, confusing sort of conflicting pictures that people can have physiologically when they start mixing drugs together, like alcohol with heroin or cocaine and heroin, which is called a speedball, where they try to get both effects maximized and prevent any letdown. The withdrawal is really fascinating from this drug, and the withdrawal you get from heroin is piloerection, yawning, rhinorrhea, sweating, vomiting, abdominal cramping, diarrhea. In general, it appears about 12 hours after your last used. You'll get tachycardia and hypertension. And the key thing about withdrawal that you have to know is that withdrawal of opiates never kills anyone. And when you tell people that, they tell you to go to hell. But the fact of the matter is, when you showed up at Bellevue back when I was in the 90s when I did my rotation there, they would say, go take some aspirin or ibuprofen and take some Gatorade. Good luck. And, what happens? You puke for a couple of days, you feel terrible, you feel the flu, but you physiologically do not die. There are 0 case reports in the literature of anyone ever dying of heroin withdrawal or opiate withdrawal. It feels terrible, and you don't want to live, but generally, you know who dies of heroin withdrawal? When someone goes and does a ton more because they can't take it anymore, and then they stop breathing, or they jump out of a window, or they crash their car. That's really how they really die from these things. So it's not life-threatening. So what do we do at Harvard Hospital here in the middle of Delaware? In general, we give these people IV fluids. We give them some antiemetics, sometimes some Floral or ketorolac or injectable nonsteroidals. Clonidine is helpful. I mean, antihistamine is sometimes helpful, like hydroxyzine or Atarax does wonders for people in withdrawal. But in general, all you're doing is attenuating the sympathomimetic craziness of being in withdrawal. You just feel like crap. So you give this stuff and you feel a little bit better in general. There are, like I mentioned, stuffers and packers, so people that are running from the law will sometimes swallow a bag of heroin, and that's tough, or cocaine. Those kind of people are difficult because if they're not sealed appropriately, this thing can break anywhere along the GI tract. And you know what happens when these guys come into the ED, they come over to the police, and they say, I didn't swallow any of these bags. And the police say, I know he put it in his mouth. And they say, no, I didn't. What are you supposed to do? Watch them until they pass it? And when I was back in the 90s, they used to handcuff people to the stretcher, this is in New York City, put an NG tube down, give you go lightly, and make you go heavily. So they do that stuff, and then they wait till you crap clear, and then they wait till you poop it out. Because if this thing breaks inside you, especially cocaine, you could die. I've seen very close things. What do you do when they say, in Delaware, it's assault if you do this. So what do you want us to do? Watch them or CAT scan them. This is a tough call, especially when they say they didn't take it. You're sitting on them anyway. They take them a bed. They want to leave. The cops are there. It's a real mess situation. And then these are my least favorite patients because I don't know what to do with them. If I send them to jail, this thing bursts. I'm going to go to jail if that thing bursts. So you really put you in a tough position. And CAT scans not 100%, X-rays not 100%. Those are really individualized cases where that's really difficult. So that's heroin. Any questions about heroin? I do want to mention a couple things about prescription opiates. In general, this is a huge problem. We've all seen it much more in the outside world than in our world, but we do see it, no doubt. Things like Oxycontin, Vicodin, Percocet, et cetera. It's the second most abused category of drugs, and we used to see a lot of forgery in Christiana. I've had a couple in my career. My best one is this guy that flipped his car. He's a young kid, 18 years old. We saw his head, we do a CAT scan, he does okay. I send him home, and he banged up pretty good. So I wrote him to 8 Percocet. I get a call about 3 hours later from the pharmacy, and they say, Dr. B, did you write for 108 Percocet? I said, oh, that's a weird number. Can you fax me that script? They faxed it. This guy was a whiz at the computer. He scanned mine in and copied my signature exactly, changed it to 108, and it looked pretty damn good. If he was half a genius or a little bit of brains, he would have just printed out 10 or 15, 8 or 18s and could have been a killing on the street. But the idiot went for 108 and got nailed by the DEA. So it's interesting, 10% on 12th graders are using Vicodin. 1 in 10. Anybody got any 12th graders in the room? Scary. It can be chewed, it can be crushed, it can be snorted, you can dissolve it in water, you can inject it. So you can take opiates any way you want it. Sounds like a drug show. So in general, there's a lot of mentions of oxycodone, no doubt. So when you look at the street, 10 milligrams a buck, cheap, right? Maybe a Walgreens, sorry. And 80 milligrams, $6. On the street, 10 milligrams is worth 10 times that. $10 for a pill, right? 80 milligrams, $80. Crazy how much money you can make on these things. So, you know, you'll have hear stories of, you know, I never read for Oxycontin ever. It's like, you know, such a long-acting opiate, people get nervous about them. But for long bone fractures or grandma with chronic pain, you're right, some of these people are getting 50 to 80, and we know there's rings of, like they call them grandma opiate rings, where grandma will fill a prescription for 50 or 100 and sell half of them. It's unbelievable. It's out there, and it does occur, so you've got to be careful. So the deaths that you see from oral agents are really high dose and heavy duty, but not as common as you think. The dosing, in general, most of the dosing issues that we get for opiates and death are really from IV use and respiratory depression, but you don't see it that much. That's opiates. Thirdly is methamphetamine, also known as crank or ice, and it's really similar to other catecholamines. And the way I look at methamphetamine, it's sort of like a long-acting sympathomimetic like cocaine. So it can be injected through or smoked, and it really has immediate effects of getting you all fired up and things like getting you restless, you get hyperpyrexia, you get nausea, vomiting, and big pupils. You treat it like cocaine too, benzos. We don't see as much methamphetamine. That's a Midwest kind of thing, but you do hear about it on occasion. No one knows what to do with methamphetamine chest pain. We think it probably has some relationship with vasoconstriction, but no one's exactly sure because it probably doesn't increase thrombus formation. So it's controversial, but you probably show that someone says, I did crank and I have chest pain, I probably do an EKG and probably treat them like a cocaine chest pain. But no one knows what to do. We just don't see a lot of people who get chest pain on methamphetamine because it's not nearly as constrictive as cocaine is. LSD, anyone ever try this? This is back when we were probably in the 70s. It's a hallucinogen, obviously absorbing all mucous membranes, as most are. The onset's pretty quick, like most are, less than an hour, and most people feel really paranoid, they hallucinate, they get psychotic, and I love the term synesthesia. So people get synesthetic when they do LSD. They hear colors or they see sounds. That is Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, all that's real good Woodstock stuff. So I did see, in my past year, I saw a guy who was 75 who did LSD. Really amazing. I said, how can you, now that I'm a little more mature, a.k.a. old, been doing this a long time, I went to him and said, how do you still do LSD at 75? And you know what he said? I've been doing this since I was 20. Hasn't affected me yet. And I said, you got a point there. You know, you're 75, you're still alive, you go right on. So it really causes a lot of other issues like sympathomimetic side effects like hypertension in big people and tachycardia. The problem with these people is you can get an MI as well. But in general, most of the time these people do okay. It's gone in a couple of hours in general, and you just got to keep them from hurting themselves from overpsychosis. So if you keep them in a quiet room and generally maybe some benzos, maybe not. Most of these guys, we don't see these in ED that much because most of these get better in a couple of hours. They don't do anything too crazy. Occasionally see them walk the streets and get a little wild, but in general, not so crazy. In general, the stuff that we see are paranoid. When they get really start screaming for Jesus on rooftops, then you start thinking about it. Another one that we see a fair amount is some PCP, also known as angel dust or vitamin K or special K. It's dissociative anesthetic. We use its cousin ketamine every day in the ED. It's one of my favorites. It's sort of like dissociative anesthetic in such where they say the light is on but no one's home. It sort of separates the thinking part of the brain from the rest of the body. It's really fascinating. It can be snorted or snorted. It's on quickly and usually gone within 15 minutes. So people get agitated, confused, hallucinating, they taxic, and really the nystagmus is classic. So when I see these patients, I always bring my students or my residents, and we do look for vertical nystagmus. Just take your finger, go up and down, and you can watch their eyes flicker as you do that. I mean, most of the police, when you get pulled over, anyone been pulled over? No. When you get pulled over, the police go like this at your eyes, because alcohol in general will increase lateral nystagmus in general. The whole will have some element of lateral nystagmus, but it will go away. When you have alcohol, it just sort of stays there. It's one reason why they do that. If you go like this to somebody, look up and down, and that flickering, they did LSD or they had some sort of brain abnormality. And it's usually the LSD, so that's something you always check. One thing that I've done is a handful of times when people come in really psychotic and agitated and paranoid is use the atypical antipsychotics. For us, Geodon or Zyprasidone, it really does wonders. I've seen remarkable turnaround where people would totally be threatening my life and afraid to go to look at anybody. Then you give them a shot, literally in 20 minutes, they're almost normal. No one knows exactly why, and they know it probably has some receptor activation in the brain that's causing this, and these atypical antipsychotics are really interesting with brain receptor activation, but it's something to consider. Jimson, we mentioned it before. It's actually grown in Delaware. There used to be a big plant right outside my office, and we used to joke around every Christmas and take pictures of it and then use it at the end of the year parties. And then security, Christiana called into it, and they removed the plant, and they're all up on pictures. But it's really grown all over the country. It can be eaten or smoked. And the funnest one we had when we had 10 kids come in because they all wanted a bonfire, and then some young thought it would be funny. They took a whole tree and threw it in the bonfire, and then all of a sudden 10 of them started acting goofy and walking around and start doing crazy things. So it's interesting that you get anticholinergic toxicity, you'll get flush, you get tachycardic. You can get hallucinations, obviously. There are some side effects where people can get some cardiac abnormalities, although pretty rare. And I've seen some pretty cool cases. The funniest thing I saw when those 10 kids came in from Jimson, we tied one kid down to the stretcher, and then I walked out of the room, I'm writing a note, and I look up, and he's walking around with the stretcher on his back while he's tied to it. It's really kind of funny. So they definitely get a fair amount of hallucinations. And you could try a drug, a cholinergic drug like Phytospigmine, but there's a lot of controversy over it because of its potential cardiac effects. Marijuana is obviously the #1 most commonly used illegal drug in some states. Most of the time, most people, we don't see a lot of medical or trauma issues from marijuana alone. The inhalants we'll occasionally see. The biggest one that we see in general are when people inhale and then decide to do what? Light up a cigarette and blow their face up. So we see a little bit of that on occasion from a trauma perspective. It's a high part. You can sniff it, or you can actually huff it, where you put it into a bag and you snort it, and you suck it in, and you look just like your alcohol intoxication. In general, most of these people do well. They look like they're drunk. But the problems are usually long-term. There's chronic problems with cardiac dysrhythmias, and then you're affecting the efficiency of your pump, and you can get dysrhythmias, obviously, seizures, et cetera. It can be a real mess. And we see this a fair amount in third world countries. In this country, I don't see it as much. Have anyone seen any gasoline sniffing? Occasionally, but not a lot. You do hear it once in a while. But the burn injuries are the one we see mostly. The chronic users obviously can get lead. There's a fair amount of lead in gasoline, so they get lead poisoning and liver problems, et cetera. GHB is another good one. You've seen that. Gamma hydroxybutyrate initially is this anesthetic designed in the 1960s. It actually is a form of GHB in a pill that can prevent people from having intermittent sleepiness or narcolepsy. But we've definitely seen it in rave parties, and people use it for working out, and occasionally hear it in date rapes, where people just all of a sudden, I was at a party, I was doing okay, next thing you know, I was on the ground and I felt really weird. So there was a rapper in this area maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, and then we got a bunch of these kids, probably 3 or 4, that just hit the deck if they did GHB, and they thought they were seizing, they didn't know, they were all pretty healthy, somewhere like 20, 25 years old. They all come in, they all had to be intubated because they stopped breathing, and then literally, somewhere around the 2 to 3 hour range, they would all wake up immediately and pull their ET tube out. So once the first guy pulled his ET tube out, we figured out it was GHB. We took down the balloon of the rest of the people that were intubated and let them sort of self-extubate as they woke up. If you think about what if tomorrow morning you wake up at 7 or 8 in the morning and you're all happy, but you open your eyes and you only know that you're breathing out of a straw, what's the first thing you would do? You would grab that thing and pull it right out. And that's what these people did, and they wake up and be totally normal, and we let them go home. You guys remember that one? There's all those GHB stuff. So most people do fairly well, and they wake up, you watch them for a little while, and that's it. So the problem is that rapid respiratory depression and CNS depression and cause them to just drop, and you'll see it sometimes at parties. So it's usually done in a couple of hours. It's not that big of a deal. There's a lot of reports of ways to reverse this, although no one knows. There's just not a lot of data or not a lot of numbers that come in GHB intoxication. Ecstasy, we're seeing a fair amount of this, but the ED, not a ton. You hear them called MDMA. There's forms of methamphetamines. There's MDA. There's MDEA. Designer drugs, you see it. You can see it in raves in general. Most of these people lose their anxiety. It lasts a couple of hours. So ecstasy, from our standpoint, is usually from when people get this sort of loss of inhibition, where it becomes a CNS stimulant, where people do aggressive things, and it's usually guys on ecstasy that will fight or jump out of windows and things like that. That's what we see mostly when they come into the ED as traumas or they injure themselves. But in general, we don't see a lot of these patients that come in unless they're hurting themselves. Also known as Molly, MDMA. There are case reports of people doing ecstasy and getting dysrhythmias from it. No one knows exactly why. They think it's tachydysrhythmias, even if they don't have underlying coronary disease, so it's probably an electrical phenomena and from the medicine itself. But you know that we've seen people who have done ecstasy and get severely hypertensive. So there's case reports of intracranial hemorrhage also, people bleeding. But hypothermia, seizures, rhabdo, et cetera, can occur. The treatment for most people on ecstasy, if I ever see them, they look okay, pretty much quiet the room down. So shut the lights off, maybe use some benzos, and that's about it. Most of the time, it'll go away on its own. Ritalin, we've seen a little bit of these kind of things, so people buy these mostly on the street or at school, but they're usually not a huge trauma or they don't become a major overdose issue, but it is a psychomedicine, and just like amphetamine, causes sympathetic stuff, and they get crushed and sometimes. The reason is that when people take a lot of Ritalin, they take a lot of powder, and they snort it all at one time. That's just case reports of people dying from that, probably from sympathetic overdose, hypertension, tachycardia, things like intracranial bleeds, et cetera. So most of the time for these things, it's benzos as well, and shut the lights off. The last thing I want to talk about for the last couple of minutes is designer drugs. There were older drugs. Years ago, we talked about LSD, cocaine, and we've known that those numbers have gone up a little bit. When you talk about non-traditional emerging web-based drugs or new drugs or designer drugs, up hundreds of %. That's what we're seeing a lot. I love this line. Anyone with an internet connection can get almost anything delivered to their home or dorm rooms. That's totally true. This stuff really can get delivered right to wherever you live. So bath salts are really interesting, and that's what we're going to talk about the last few moments of. It's a Schedule I controlled substance from, it's called Ketamine, which is a central nervous system stimulant. They're not bath salts. They have nothing to do with baths. They have nothing to do with salt. So it's just sort of a way that people have labeled them to avoid prosecution or avoid the law. And we'll talk about what that means. You can get it in powder form or a capsule, and you can easily take it in. It can be snorted, it can be smoked, injected, or you can mix it with water and swallow. And you used to find it years ago, or at least when this first came out, no one knew really what they were. They knew there was some sort of designer drug, but I would see this stuff, and I'm sure you did too, in 7-Eleven, car washes. You can get it almost anywhere because there was no regulation. People didn't even know what it was. They initially started selling it as plant food or bath salt right in front of everyone's face. It was really bold and it worked because no one really knew what the substance was because the FDA doesn't truly regulate things like plant food or bath salt. It's kind of funny. That's how they get around it. So Ketamine comes from the cat plant, K-H-A-T. They find it mostly in Africa and some in India. And they know that they make a lot of this stuff in Europe and Asia. It's really big numbers. And it actually started in Eastern Europe about 5 to 10 years before it even came to America. And Great Britain and Germany were big, and it was magic plant food, for many years. And then they looked at one of the this drug of abuse called methadone, which is sort of like similar kind of mechanism, and they started noticing it probably around 7 years ago. And these little packets can cost about $20, and they were called sort of like, what the word on the street is, why do cocaine to get in trouble when this is legal? And that's how they sort of marketed 5 years ago. And things like, they had legal alternatives to like cocaine, et cetera. And the substances are like methadone, methadone, all these sort of like synthetic versions are sort of like under the class of bath salts or designer drugs. And when you look at it, they really were not intended for human consumption, and they weren't technically marketed that way. These are made in labs. They put it in a piece of tinfoil and say it's via plant. The FDA doesn't care. It's not for human consumption, if you say that's what it is. So it is called research chemicals, plant food, et cetera, and that's how you circumvent the CSA, that Controlled Substance Act. That's how that's the way you get away with it. Interesting amount of stuff when you look at the design stuff. So the combination of effects and toxicity, it has a lot of different weird receptor activation. No one knows exactly. Every type of bath salt is a little bit different, and everyone reacts a little bit differently based on the experience, the age, the weight, the whole variety of different factors. So it's like methamphetamine, it's like ecstasy. There's a whole variety of effects it can lead to, like euphoria, enhanced mood, some hostility stuff, either decreased or increased. And, you know, everybody acts a little differently. No. You still seeing this on the screen? Yeah, we lost it. I'm going to keep going until we finish. So when you take it orally, the effects usually come on within 15 to 30 minutes, and they usually last a couple of hours. It's tough because there's so many different case reports and stories of what people like on basketball. Some people totally bad job and don't do anything. Other people get a little crazy and want to fight everyone, so you just never know what's going to happen. Oh, there you go. So the most common effects, you really see a lot of different effects, and it's linked to really mostly the problem people are the ones that use it most often or have prolonged usage, and other, you know, you can have tachycardia, sympathomimetic changes, and a variety of other issues. But we do know that it is very addicting, and it creates a lot of agitation in at least half the people. And most of the people can act paranoid and get these sort of like a lot of mood swings. And in general, it's sort of like a combination of a variety of agents all as one. And it's sort of tough to say because everyone sort of acts a little bit differently, to be honest with you. So, you know, it's interesting when you look at different reports of what's happening, and it's hard to get these numbers, but you read a whole different variety of side effects because they're all sort of have slightly different receptor activation. The poison control centers in the U.S. started hearing about this in 2010 with a couple hundred calls, and a year later they were getting a couple thousand calls, and then a year after that they got 13,000 calls. So that's a fair amount of increase in the past couple of years. Some crazy cases that you hear, this one in Blair County, where two friends had a fight, started stabbing each other. Another woman who got behind the wheel of her car and was erratic. She had a kid in the back, and she was banging her head against the steering wheel at a red light. It's crazy. So what happened is in 2011, they started banning these individual substances. And you know what people would do? They're pretty smart, these chemists. They would just change one side change and make it a different substance. Then the government would have to find that substance and ban that one. Kind of silly. But things have changed a little bit differently now in such that it's they labeled the whole sort of like class a Schedule 1 and makes it illegal to distribute these things. So it makes it a little bit better for what it's worth. There's other things out there that are designer drugs that we should mention because they're specific names like Spice or K2. There are synthetic cannabinoids, which are not really cannabis, but they're actually like a natural form or style of marijuana. And they have liquid forms. They can cause you to get agitated and tachycardic. You see that on occasion. And many states obviously are banning these things. And the problem is the chemists will just alter their chemical compounds slightly to get away from this ban and try to evade the legal system. They're trying to sort of control the whole class, which is making it really difficult. There's something called meow meow, also known as drone or bubble or MCAT. That's another form of methadrome or a designer drug like a bath salt, which is like a stimulant, sympathomimetic, where people get all fired up and agitated. And then things like nutmeg, people are using as synthetic drugs. You can buy it as much as you can just take a ton of, like 50 grams of it and turn it into a powder. People take that and you get really hallucinating and tachycardic and agitated. So you can really, people can design almost anything out of these things. So in general, we're seeing a lot of it. It's not going away. It's causing a lot of trauma. We're seeing a bunch of people coming into the ED, and now finally 2 years ago, or like a year and a half ago, there's a Synthetic Drug Abuse Prevention Act that came out. There are 31 compounds, and they just sort of enhance it or develops existing laws in 44 states. So there's a lot that they're trying to do, which is finally helpful, but you know, they're still trying, people are still trying to evade the system. These underground chemists just sort of alter the compound and create new versions that are not covered by the law. We know that's going to happen, but at least they understand and this is out there and they come up with something decent. What do you do when you see these? No one knows what to do when you see people with bath salts. So no great guidelines, no great screens. There are drug screens out there, but the sensitivity specificity is not great. You can do it. You can actually buy some of them over the counter now, but we don't really use them. You know, try and be nonchalant. Ask the patient. Check their belongings. Check their pockets. You'll find some fascinating things. Try to treat them systematically and support them. So benzo, shut the lights off. Try to prevent them from hurting you or themselves. And then sometimes you may have to use antipsychotic in these people. The big thing is you just don't want them to hurt themselves or hurt others around them. And there are some really interesting websites that you can look at a lot of cool information like Irowid, Lyceum, Shroomery. So it's goal-directed treatment and try to get these people some form of counseling. I think that's pretty helpful. You can find a lot of this stuff online from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And I know my time is right at an hour, so I hope this is helpful. And it's been my pleasure to speak to you guys, and thank you very much.
Thank you.